What's up, everybody? Happy Qwednesday. We're going to get a question about what Qwednesday means in just a second here, but let's take them in the order that they're received in. Am I going to be able to handle what people bring today? This is from Barbara. We're starting out. Is the Swedenborg family going to be doing any more Jeff Mara podcasts in the future? That was fun, wasn't it? Swedenborg family being myself. Chelsea was on there. Jeff Mara runs a great YouTube channel where he interviewed a couple of us. I would hope we're back. We haven't scheduled anything or reached out to him yet about that, but yeah, I'd love to get in there. Matthew asks or says, "Hi Curtis, I'm reading Corinthians and Paul references the Lord, God, and Jesus. Also God and his Son almost as separate. Does he think they are separate beings?" I don't know what Paul thinks. I do know that Paul was, as Jonathan Rose would say, downtown faith alone, or this was, people leaned heavily on Paul when they were justifying doctrines that Swedenborg didn't agree with. I think there's a lot of people who thought that the Lord and God and Jesus and the Father and the Son are different people. Swedenborg was a bit radical when he came along for saying that the Lord is one and these are different aspects. And in the Bible, where different names for God come up, in the correspondential parts of it anyway, those are different aspects of God. So I'm reading about the creation story right now for an event that I'm doing. And there's two creation stories. One in the very beginning of Genesis, that you're probably most familiar with, let there be light. Maybe you heard of that, birds and fish and all that. But then right after that finishes, there's a second creation story, which doesn't start right way back at the very beginning of being without form and void, but it would go back through the plants and water. And in the second creation story, a different name for God is used, Jehovah God, whereas in the first creation story, it's just God. And Swedenborg says that's because the first creation story is about the creation of us from being worldly into being spiritual people. And the second creation is about going from spiritual to being heavenly, and heavenly has to do with the will, and Jehovah God is about God and as divine love, and God is about God as divine wisdom. It's all one person. It's all one God. God is just one person that you could sit down and say, "Oh, it's you, God," and God could say, "Hey, what's happening?" And you'd be really talking to God. Just like you can really talk to a person, even if you're just sitting with their body in the room, but their soul is present through the body. So that's what's up. But we know so little of God, and there's so much to God that these different names can help us understand in what way we're addressing God and what aspects. John Bishop says, "Curtis, have you ever experienced a spiritual connection with someone who is on or not on the earth, but can only be described as your twin flame who embodies everything that you are?" I'm curious, John, if you're still here in the chat, what do you mean like who is on or not on the earth? You mean somebody that you had what you feel like is a connection with, but then they've died, or that you encountered a spirit and then you're feeling like you connected with them? And say a little bit more about what's the nature of that connection. Get back to me and we'll get back to that. This is Richard, who says, "Do our thoughts have any effects on those who have passed into the spiritual world?" Yes, they sure do. Let's see the different ways that Swedenborg describes that happening. One, you've got the old... the spirits cluster around the kinds of things that we think about. Let's see, Swedenborg describes once in his Journal of Spiritual Experiences, there's a bunch of spiritual activity hovering around something indistinct in the middle, and that indistinct thing is us. He talked about the things that Swedenborg was reading and so thinking, causing certain thoughts, similar but parallel but correspondential, I should say, thoughts to appear in the angels in the spiritual world. As I'm saying that, I guess I gotta frame it by saying, like, there's causation, correlation does not equal causation. Really, stuff flows from spiritual to physical. So even though it seems as though when Swedenborg would think about something that would cause the angels to think about it, it's more that the angels think about it and that causes Swedenborg to think about it, or that Providence is kind of doing it at the same time. What is Curtis talking about right now? So I don't know. Do our thoughts have any effect on those who passed on? Thought brings presence, says Swedenborg. So it seemed like you can move your spirit closer to other people's spirits by thinking about them. Let's move on. Carolyn, what does Qwednesday mean? This show is informally referred to as Qwednesday, which is just questions on Wednesday. Question Wednesday. The one that I had the right answer to. Tim Wood. Can you change the past by imagining a different outcome to an event and shifting to a parallel reality where the thing in the event happened differently? I don't think so. There's no reference in Swedenborg to parallel realities, as I understand that term. My history with that is that there's some physicists or something that have theorized that there are many, many universes. There's a multiverse, and because there may be an infinite number of universes, and because there's an infinite number of universes, you'd have to say, as infinity goes on, eventually there's a universe in which everything is exactly the same as this one, because just all possible universes have occurred, except in that universe, I have a green shirt with planets on it instead of a black one. But Swedenborg does not seem to indicate anything like that existing. And I would say, Tim, that he would say you wouldn't want to do that even if you could. Shifting, imagining a different outcome and shifting. As much as so many of the things that happen in life seem to go the way we would not want them to go, Swedenborg is guaranteeing that God is allowing the best possible things to happen. That if something that is bad is happening, something worse could have happened but didn't, and anything that is bad that is allowed to happen eventually will have goodness brought out of it. And the divine providence is optimizing everything. So if we were able to change something in it, not only would we be actually changing it to something worse, which I know sounds unbelievable because so many things happen in a way that's so painful and bizarre seeming, but also that us changing a bit of divine providence would have these echoes, consequences to eternity. Swedenborg compares it in one place to, like, if you were going to shoot a bow, they had bows back then, and you just move your aim a little bit. If the target's a mile off, it's way off. Divine providence is something that is working with everybody's free will. Like, we have freedom to what we choose and what we love and what we intend, but we don't have freedom of outcomes. I don't have the freedom to play in the National Basketball Association. I just can't. I can't do it. Doesn't matter what I try, but I have the freedom to want to do that and to try to do that. So divine providence is working with everyone's freedom, but the ultimate outcomes are presided over by divine providence, and it should be in a way that's to the greatest happiness of all. Yeah. Asks right after that, have you ever heard about level 4 multiverse? So I just gave you what I have about multiverses. I haven't heard about level 4. I'm not an expert on multiverses at all. Hello Now 3 in Berlin. Hello Robert Martin. Hey Sean Smith. Sexy Haitian Vixen says, can someone block your connect with your fiance that passed? Ever since my friend found out, he doesn't connect as much. Assuming you're talking about your fiance doesn't connect with you as much. Swedenborg does talk about married partners having a bond that lasts into the afterlife. So he talks about when one dies, the spirit of the other can be dwelling with that one. Man, other people being able to interrupt that, I gotta say, I have no idea. I don't think... I know that spirits could affect your communication with other spirits. Swedenborg talks about devious spirits doing all kinds of things like impersonating other people, making it seem like things that were happening that weren't. But as far as people being able to mess with your connection to the spiritual world, gotta say, Swedenborg doesn't mention anyone doing that. But it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. I don't know. Willie asks, when in the afterlife, can one create what they feel is an ideal reality based on thought and desire, such as living next to your closest loved ones who depart before you? There's definitely a link in the afterlife between your thoughts and feelings and the reality that appears around you. Everything spiritual, if you were in the afterlife and you opened up your eyes and looked around, you would see a landscape and objects and houses and things like you see here. But those things would trace their origin back to this state of mind and heart of the people who are living there. So very much the house that you live in is a reflection of your mind. Even the biome around you, the kinds of plants and animals that are around the community that you're in, is a reflection of the spiritual state of the people in that community. The way that you look physically, was the spiritual equivalent of physically, the way that you just look, your face looks, is a reflection of your deepest convictions and feelings. So you very much do shape your reality. But what he doesn't seem to indicate is that is something you do independently and voluntarily. This is something that is more like a natural reaction where God has it set up so that your insides reflect externally. The state of heaven is a state of wanting to be led by God rather than be led by ourselves. So what we'll feel like when we get to that state, once we're ready to go to heaven, is, I would want God to design the perfect place for me. And people that you love the most absolutely live next to you, because the people that you have the deepest compatibility and similarity with, they're the same laws that put you where you are, put them where they are. Swedenborg talks about families from long ago in the physical world still living together. As we were just saying, married partners staying married partners and living in the same house. Communities, he says, when you come into your spiritual community, it feels like these are people you've all known since your childhood. Maybe some of them actually are. Keith, I should have some better way to close questions. Why do I feel like I don't close them? I gave you a start to think about. Keith, hello Curtis. Hi Keith. Does Emanuel Swedenborg say anything about what type of jobs we will have in heaven or how we will serve the community? He says, for starters, that the kinds of jobs that we have on earth are relatively few in comparison to the kind of ways that you can serve the community in the afterlife. He lists at one point some of the functions that angels participate in. One of them is accompanying newly deceased people and leading them into heaven. Another one is going into hell and protecting and mitigating the harm there that people want to try to do against each other. There is a function where angels will raise children who had died, young, and raise them in heaven. There's teachers, there are leaders and officials, like people that are in charge of communities. There are people who do like performance and art. Yeah. So that's like a really bare bones description, but it seems like the amount of things you can do there's many more of them, but they're tangible like that, but they're also like really important. He talks about couples there producing not children, but producing goodness and truth. So I know that angelic communities also are where we get our good thoughts from. So somehow thoughts are being created and produced there. I think a lot of what you do has to do with the refinement and perfection of the spiritual equivalent to technology, which is wisdom. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about the specifics of that, though. Gabrielle says, what would it look like in reality if my spirit was fighting off a demon that got into my mind somehow? It is now trying to seize full control over me. Sorry that if you're feeling turmoil. I don't know if I know. What would it look like in reality if my spirit was fighting off a demon? So only God fights for us. God through angels. So when you say what does it look like in reality, do you mean like what would you experience? Swedenborg talks about crises of the spirit or clashes between angels and evil spirits over us. We experience those as intense negative feelings, as like crises, mental crises, and that sort of thing. Yeah, I'm a little curious for you to say a little more about what you're experiencing. Gina says, I'm glad to be in this live show. What's up? Swedenborg has been part of my daily life since I found it. Great team, Curtis and company. Oh, thanks. Appreciate it. I'm glad Swedenborg is part of my daily life too, man. I'm telling you, it really, it's a good part of a balanced breakfast. Willie adds to his question about, do you live next door to the closest loved ones? Living in a replica of where one lived in this life. Swedenborg said there was a spiritual London. He was publishing in London. There's a spiritual London. There's a spiritual Amsterdam. The spiritual equivalents of physical places exist. And I think the reason why that is that people here bring their mental conceptions of the place that they live in and also have similar minds, and that sort of creates that. But I think those spiritual world communities are a little less, they're not like a final destination for you, that there are more heavenly versions of those things. As far as like, would anyone live in a house that looked like I think it's very possible. I think that he describes people from ancient times living in tents and things that I'm sure were similar to the dwellings they were used to living in. So, and at the time that Swedenborg was writing, people were living in palaces and things, which is like the architecture that was around in his time. So maybe so. David says, after reaching my mid-40s, I've strangely noticed that the past appears to be the future, like Star Wars. Which part of Star Wars? Yeah. Tell me a little more. Oh, here, Gabrielle says, what would a spiritual trial look like if I suddenly was put on one by my spirit? What would I be doing, and where would I be while doing it? Yeah, according to Swedenborg, crises of the spirit, you would be just doing your regular life. The spiritual part of it is angels and evil spirits, heaven and hell clashing over you, and which one of those is going to get to influence you. Swedenborg says, as I said before, you experience it as internal distress. You sometimes experience it as pangs of conscience, or you're feeling guilty about things in your past because hell tries to accuse and condemn you of things in the past, while angels try to defend and put a good interpretation on whatever you've done. Also, there's distress. Things that you love and care about will seem to be being attacked, or you're at risk. Those are at risk of harm in some way. There's a great number in Secrets of Heaven, I think it's 1820, where he says evil spirits will whip you up into a fog of emotion, use your own longings against you, infiltrate the vital energy behind your cravings, and cause you distress. So he says, you don't realize when this is happening that there's a spiritual cause to it. It just seems like it's all coming from inside yourself. So it's not something that would necessarily, if you can't see spirits and things, you wouldn't start seeing them during this. You just experience it as emotions and thoughts. But dramatic and intense and painful, but then afterwards comforting. There's comfort, and you're brought to a new depth of spirit and new kinds of peace. Deborah Miller says, hi there. This question has been on my mind for years and years. Why do you think Jesus had to die such a brutal, torturous death instead of a quick death? I don't understand why he had to suffer so. Segue. Jesus was undergoing a spiritual crisis like the one that I was just describing, but he was doing so on the grandest scale, because whereas when we are going through our spiritual crises, which sometimes are accompanied by our own physical pain, we are participating in a little struggle over us. Jesus was having to struggle against the entirety of all the evil in all the hearts of anyone in the human race. So he was fighting all of hell, and he was doing it in the same way we do, through bearing struggle or bearing suffering, and in that suffering coming to depend on what's good and true, and using the resilience that those things bring to overcome. So that's one side of it. Jesus was that you can have these spiritual trials that are accompanied by physical things, and when they're most severe, somehow the most good can be done there. So Jesus was this was a way in which he was able to set hell in order. Also, Jesus represented the Word made flesh, so he was in correspondence showing what people had done to religious truth. They had taken what was meant to be the divine path to goodness and love, and made it into this tool of control and of hatred, and that's a big deal. And they treated Jesus the way that the human race had treated the divine truth. So hopefully that's helpful. Gina says, my question, do our deceased loved ones linger with us here in the physical world? If yes, how often are they also our guardian angels? Man, those are great questions that through Swedenborg, I don't have an answer to. I mean, our guardian angels are constantly with you. There are constantly two angels, one with your intellect and one with your will, and they never leave, even if we want to totally follow all the cravings and insanity that comes out of hell. Angels are still there, and they are still trying their best to influence us. As far as whether those come from people that we know, I don't know. He does, as I said, have that passage about the spouse of the loved one dwelling with the spouse that's died, dwelling with the one who hasn't died yet. So that sounds sort of constant. I don't know if that's the same thing with relatives. And for some reason, he didn't really spend a lot of time on that, even though I'm sure that's what a lot of people want to know. Well, the reason is that he wanted to give us the universal picture of things, tell you exactly how all spiritual reality works. And there's probably not a hard and fast rule about whether it's people you know, your loved ones that are around you, or angels that you don't know yet, but are your spiritual friends. All right, let's see what else is going on. If you're new here, so people are just putting things in the chat and I'm talking about them. Okay. Cecil, hope you're well, Curtis. Yeah, I am. Thank you. I was wondering if there's anything that you don't agree or differ from Swedenborg in, be it theology, teleology, ontology, etc., etc. Sure. Let's see. What don't I agree? I mean, there's things that I think he probably didn't get right. There's a lot of little things, like I'll give like some example or something that there's some of them that I don't think are true. Like a corroborating physical example. I don't know like how to say whether I differ, because some of the areas he's talking about, like I get my ability to explore those areas from him, and they're not areas that I can directly access. Like I don't have I don't have spiritual experiences. I don't do out of body experiences. Yeah, probably. And there's things that I don't get, or things that I don't like, or there's things I hope he's not quite right about. I don't know if they're not popping to mind right now, but it's not all perfect, but so much of it is that that's why I'm hanging around. Amber says, "Hi Curtis, why would we only incarnate as a human once? In my opinion, if we are eternal, why not come back and keep learning?" Yeah, I can see why it would. The appeal of learning forever is really good. I think Swedenborg would argue that yes, you absolutely keep learning forever. That if we didn't continue to grow in our wisdom and love forever, if we ever, I know everything, then life would lose all of its joy. We wouldn't have happiness that comes from growth. I think he would argue that that once in this world is enough to get what we need to equip us to then go and learn forever spiritually. That I'll try to think of analogies, but you're in the womb once, then you get born and you go and do your whole life in that your body keeps growing and growing and changing, but you never go back into the womb because you don't need to. What's in the womb is already formed. The rest of the growing happens outside of it. Same thing with, you've got to be in first grade and learn letters and numbers, or kindergarten and how to start writing, but then you don't need to ever go back to kindergarten because you already know what's going to be taught there. So I guess the main thing would be life in the spiritual world is more dynamic than life here. It's bigger, it's more meaningful, and everything we do here we do more of in the afterlife. The thing that makes this life really crucial is that in it we have a split mind to the point where we can observe our own behavior and make an initial choice about whether we want to gravitate toward what's good and true or what's evil and false. But then we develop that choice forever, and we build a basic foundation of concepts and things, but then we go live on it forever spiritually. So John Bishop got back about his earlier question. He said, Curtis, it's about twin flames. So remember way back in the beginning, he was saying, have you ever felt the connection with someone who when you met them, there was an instant connection that you never felt with anyone else, something that you just seem to have known forever? I don't think so. Swedenborg does seem to describe that kind of thing happening in the spiritual world. I know my answer is everything you guys are talking about, Swedenborg says it happens in the spiritual world. But this, as I mentioned before, like when you meet people in your spiritual community and when you're in heaven and they're in heaven and you go there, it feels like I've always known these people. These are my people. And he does talk about soulmates meeting each other in the afterlife. To soulmates, so like you're in Swedenborg's worldview, your eternal married partner, your eternal soulmate, that you do meet them and think, oh wow, they're the one for me, and they think the same thing about you. It doesn't always happen like that in the world. So, yeah. So it happens for sure spiritually. So I don't know. I'm sure it happens to some people in different ways here. Yeah. Where to go? Man, I lost all my stuff. Okay, here we go. Flagged downtown. How do spirits attach themselves to abandoned property, crypts, cemeteries, and the like? Swedenborg talked about spirits being attached to a teapot. Now, I don't think it was that they were attached to the physical teapot, but I guess this gets back into kind of our thoughts affect spirits, but that Swedenborg had a mental image of the teapot because there was a teapot in his house, and so he saw it and he knew about it. So it went from being physical to something in his mind, which is spiritual. And excuse me, there were some spirits, like sort of simple-minded spirits, that didn't want him to break that teapot because that was an anchoring thing for them somehow. It's a passage in his Journal of Spiritual Experiences. It's not something he expounds on a ton. It's a fascinating concept. But wait, there's one other thing. Oh, the other example of spirits being attached to his mental imagery was that he would usually write in a certain room. And then one time when he left that room and went to somewhere else, I don't know if it was somewhere he'd never been before, but the spirits were totally confused. They didn't know where they were or what was going on, and their usual influence got totally interrupted. This is why, sometimes you gotta, I can't get any thinking done in this room. I gotta go to this other one. It seems like spirits are not attached to physical objects, but are attached to our mental pictures of those objects. So it could be that, yeah, with sort of your classic idea of haunting from movies and stuff, where where there's like a graveyard and you go there and you feel the presence of something. Could be that spirits are attracted to the image in your mind, or it could be that when anyone forms a mental conception of that particular thing, there's a spirit attached to it. I don't know. I don't know. Okay. R. Occam says, Curtis, question. Have you done an interview with Jerry Marzinsky, a man who has worked with schizophrenics and is a protege of Wilson Van Dusen and his theory of the presence of spirits and madness? Full circle, man. Long time ago when we had just started the show, I did a series of interviews with Jerry Marzinsky. Let's see. How to deal with evil spirits. Our first show we put out is called on this topic is called How to Deal with Evil Spirits. There it is. On the bottom of the first page of Google. Well, we'll get up there. He's in here. At the time, he was anonymous, but he's since come out. But we have 2 other shows with him in there. I went and met him and interviewed him because Wilson Van Dusen was a student of Swedenborg. So I know Jerry. He's great. So yes, I certainly have. There's one. There's also the lies evil spirits tell us. I think he was in that one. And then how evil... One other one in that series. Yeah, I do know Jerry Marzinsky. David says, when I was a little boy and first learned that people die, I thought to myself, that idea is possibly untrue, and I accused people of not telling the truth. I'm starting to think I was right. Swedenborg says angels don't have a word for death. Because they don't have a concept of it. It's just, you don't die. Your consciousness just changes what it's aware of. Okay, so Carolyn says, why are some humans persecuted their entire lives? Does Swedenborg address this? Not directly. I know that he talks about how people will doubt the existence of divine providence and or God's governance of everything because they see that people who are not nice can succeed, and people who are nice and good can be persecuted and have a really hard life, and it doesn't seem to be divinely just. But he says that God is always focusing on what is going to last, not what's going to disappear. All the conditions of our life right now, they're flying by, and soon they'll be over, including the hardships that we go through. So what really matters is, or the successes that we have, what really matters is the impact those have on our spirits, because that impact is permanent. So I would imagine that if somebody was persecuted their whole life, it would have to be that good is going to be brought out of that to they'll be developing spiritually. I don't know if you're talking about yourself. If so, I mean, sorry. I'm not, when I try to say, oh, good's coming out of bad, it doesn't mean that bad isn't bad and that I'm not upset that it happens and I don't wish there wasn't some other way. Just the theory of how in the end it's all right. In the end, it's not a deal breaker, is that something good comes out of it. So if you look back on your life and say, I know I can look back on mine and see the things that were the most painful and distressing to me, I can see a lot of the improvement they've made on my personality and my interests and my consciousness. Maybe you see that there for you, maybe, or ask that person, has something good come out of it for them? I would imagine that, yeah, that's one of the factors, is that ultimately it's going to lead them to a happier eternal state, even if it's not good in the present. iHacker316, did Swedenborg give much advice on how to live this life as opposed to just mapping the spirit realm? He actually, giving advice on how to live this life was the main thing that he did. The mapping the spirit realm was all just in service of how to live this life. That's the thing too, because people are always like, well, does Swedenborg talk about how to have spiritual experiences? And does he say that you need to go to have spiritual experiences and see the afterlife? No. Everything that he talks about being important is stuff that we do in our day-to-day life. And it boils down to, we are trying to make love of usefulness or of doing what is right and good the thing at the top of our priority list, and then our own self-image and desire to have our way is at the bottom. It's not gone, but it serves those things that are up there. And to get there, we have to do repentance, reformation, and regeneration. So repentance is look at yourself and identify things that you believe are harmful or are against what's good and true, and try not to do those and ask God for help not doing those. And then there's all these other tenets of faith and idea that he gives. Let's see, there's a show we did called The Day-to-Day Process of Our Salvation. Oh. Come on now. You gotta type faster. People are watching this. People are paying good time to watch this. Okay, go. So this is going to be in the chat. Day-to-Day Process of Our Salvation. You can search that on YouTube, or that plus Swedenborg. That gives some of things to live by. There's a ton. It's yeah. Yes, he sure does. GTurtle12YT, if physical infirmities and defects are fixed in the afterlife, does cosmetic surgery results persist? Nope. How your body is a physical object, and how it looks is shaped by physical things. Yep, you can change it, you can cut it and stuff it, and that makes it look different. There's a little bit of spiritual influence in that, your personality, which is your mind, kind of shapes how you're using your features and the expressions you make and stuff. But really, how you look it's all physical stuff. It's your genes, it's how you're, how the birth process was for you. It's what you ate when you were growing up. It's the environments you were in. It's the procedures you had to. That's what shapes it. Spiritually, your spiritual face. When you die, your body dies, and you wake up in the spiritual world, but you still have body and face and everything. That initially looks like you did in the world, but changes to match your, as I said earlier in the show, it matches your deep convictions, matches your feelings. So like inner beauty becomes outer beauty there. So what every bit of you looks like, what your eyes look like, what your hands look like, has to do with what kind of mind you have. That's what gives you the form there. So nothing, no physical procedure can stick with you. Gaston says, Swedenborg says we're all born for heaven. What about the psychopaths? The clinical cases of people who can't have empathy or love for others. Yeah, well, everybody is God's kid, like God's child. So there's no way that God is going to make a system where somebody just slips through the cracks, because to us, we can say, what about those psychopaths over there? To God, that person is like the center of the universe and completely the object of love. So God is going to do everything possible to make sure that everybody gets every opportunity to love God, which is what we would call heaven. Or if they really want to love the pleasure you get out of doing things that are cruel or mean in some way or hellish, then God will still try to give you the happiest possible life you can have within the limitations of those loves. So if there's really somebody who has a clinical case where they can't have empathy or love for other people, that sounds like they don't have freedom. Spiritual freedom, which I was talking about in the beginning, which is the freedom to choose heaven or hell inside yourself. So without freedom and rationality, you can't truly add things to your spirit that stay. So I'd imagine the process that's going on with their spirit is different. Like the things they're doing are not becoming part of who they are in the same way. I don't know a ton about what the state of being a psychopath is like and the ins and outs of it. I bet there's a lot to learn there. But just from my layman's view, I would say without freedom and rationality, you're not really forming your spirit. Gabrielle says, what happens in the lowest heaven closest to the hell levels and the highest hell closest to the heaven levels in the spirit realm? What should they be like? Yeah, so I know less about the highest hell, but the lowest heaven is people who they know what you're supposed to do, and so they'll do it. I know you're not supposed to kill people, you're not supposed to hurt people, and they'll abide by that. They don't have like overwhelming. They're well behaved, like friendly people. You wouldn't mind hanging out with them, but they don't have an overwhelming love for their neighbor. They don't love their neighbor more than themselves. They believe in God, and you're talking about the first heaven is like a humongous place. It would have, I'm sure, way more people in it than exist on the earth right now. So, I never even seen it. I'm just going off a little bit of what Swedenborg said, but in general, that's sort of what the first heaven is. It's like you're willing to see that certain rules are good and you don't break them, and you have, you're amiable or amicable with people, and you're kind, but maybe you've got a good amount of self aggrandizement, but it's not that serious. And I think that's about the lowest heaven. I don't look at that up more, but there's my my thought. Oh man, that went fast. Everybody, sorry. I see there's a ton that I didn't get to. Please leave them in the comments after this. So write a comment. Our moderators will get to you, and we'll have a lot of fun. Thanks, everyone. Great questions today. I'll see you again next week. Same Qwednesday time, same Qwednesday channel. Thanks everyone for being interested and doing